the Jahiliyyah and pre-Islamic Arabia are two different places. They're two different places. You can study the Jahiliyyah. You can read, Islamic period sources like Wahab bin Munabbih. You can read Ubayd bin Sharia and these kinds of guys who are talking about pre-Islamic Arabia. They're talking about the Jahiliyyah. Okay? That is, there are obviously elements of reality in there, but in general, that's storyland. All right? That's a very different place than the pre-Islamic Arabia that you excavate and that you document on rocks and rock faces and things of that. That pre-Islamic Arabia is a very different place. And there can be two disciplines, one that studies the literary pre-Islamic Arabia, the Jahiliyyah, and one that engages with the documentary and archaeological evidence.
Peace, everyone, and welcome to another installment of Real Talk with Tehran and Roxana. Today, we have an engaging episode lined up for you, focused on the fascinating topic of pre-Islamic Arabia. And with the help of our esteemed guests, we'll explore the realms of identity and religion by delving into what the epigraphic evidence reveals about these aspects of the region before the moment Islam emerged on the scene. We hope you all find the intricate layers of this history interesting and gain insights into the era that laid the foundation for a profound religious shift. We are honored to have with us today Professor Ahmad Al-Jallad, a renowned expert in epigraphy and historical linguistics. Professor Al-Jallad's specializations include the early history of Arabic and North Arabian. His extensive research covers Arabic from the pre-Islamic period based on documentary sources, the Greco-Arabica, which is Arabic and Greek transcription from the pre-Islamic period, language classification, North Arabian, and Arabic epigraphy, as well as historical semantic linguistics. As an author, his notable works include an outline of the grammar of Safaitic inscriptions, released with Brill 2015, the Damascus Psalms Fragment, Middle Arabic and the Legacy of Old Hijazi, released in 2019, a Dictionary of Safaitic Inscriptions, released with Brill in 2019, and the Religion and Rituals of the Nomads of Pre-Islamic Arabia, also released with Brill in 2022, a work that we hope to talk a little bit about today. And Professor Al-Jallad has also led and participated in several epigraphic and archaeological projects. Okay, and that was really just a condensed version of your CV. There's probably a lot more that could be added to it. Numerous articles that you've written, which was really my introduction to much of your scholarship, was one that was on Greco-Arabic, which is found in Greg Fisher's book that he edited, Arabs Between Empires, I believe, released in 2015 or something of that sort. But yeah, just to get into your background, Dr. Al-Jallad, could you share with our listeners how you first became interested in epigraphy? What was it about the field that captivated you? And before that, I'm kind of being an improper guest. Thank you for joining us for this discussion, taking the time out of, I know, your busy schedule to talk about these things.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I know we've corresponded for it's been years, hasn't it?
Yeah, quite a while.
And we finally found a moment to speak. So that's so it's good to be here. Yeah, thank you for the kind introduction. Very nice. Let's see, how did I get interested in this material? Well, let's talk a little bit about this material. What's epigraphy, right? Epigraphy is epigraphy is any kind of text that's been carved on stone or rock or on some art support, right, that has survived the expanse of time. All right. You have modern epigraphy as well. Some of it's just a couple of decades old, also very interesting. But what attracted me to this field is ancient epigraphy, right? From pre-Islamic Arabia specifically, because in the popular imagination, we are led to believe that there are no primary documentary sources from pre-Islamic Arabia. It was a kind of a Jahiliyyah, an age of ignorance, which we can actually understand as the age of our ignorance about that age, because there are no documents, there's nothing to know. And then in my studies of Semitic languages, I came across some early works on a group of inscriptions called Ancient North Arabian, which were pre-Islamic texts from the Arabian Peninsula extending, and we're talking about it in a geographic sense, not a political sense, so extending up into the Syrian desert. And of course, the ancient South Arabian inscriptions, which document the languages, history, and cultures of ancient Yemen. These texts were direct witnesses to what was previously a mythological age, right? So by studying them, we could actually recover lost history, languages of peoples that have long gone extinct, cultures, lifeways. All of this material lay hidden behind these very enigmatic and very difficult to treat texts, right? So I became very interested in exploring that and learning more about pre-Islamic Arabia from pre-Islamic Arabians, not how they remembered, but works that they produced themselves, right? And what we can uncover about this period in time. And then, of course, what further interested me, or another aspect of this work that I discovered, was the pleasures of field work, actually going out and searching for and discovering these texts, right? These ancient inscriptions. So I've worked in Jordan, I've worked in Saudi Arabia, and the kind of discoveries that I've had the privilege of making are really incredible. So, for example, I recently published an inscription that very likely, and I always say very likely when we talk about the past, because certainty is unattainable. So we make the most plausible arguments we can for a certain scenario. So I say very likely we've discovered the first mention of Jesus, and that is called by the name Isa, right? Or which would correspond to Quranic Isa. Isa in the Safaitic inscriptions in pre-Islamic times, right? So this text here demonstrates that the name Isa was not a, let's say, Quranic innovation, but rather existed and was used among Arabs centuries before the Quran. Big discovery, wonderful, wonderful thing to work on. But the story behind this discovery is quite nice as well. We were surveying in a big wadi, and I'd taken a team of students with me. I sometimes take students with me for training to field work, and you know, some macho guys who didn't listen to the advice of taking enough water. Oh no, it's fine. We don't need too much water, and we can go in tank tops as well. Well, the sun is very strong. It's more than 100 degrees. We're doing a lot of cardio going up and down hills. And one of our guys, runs out of water, completely exhausted, just can't go anymore, right? He's having a heat attack or something. So, all right, we need to cut the mission short. We need to take the shortcut back to the car. So it's a hike still, but we need to get there. So we went off our plan. We went over a hill, and the cars were parked up in a dried lake. And then we saw a natural footpath, not an artificial footpath, something that, you know, humans had created in this hill. So we took it, very convenient. It was ancient. And it led us to a cairn, all right, which is a tumulus, a collection of stones that was filled with Safaitic inscriptions, the ancient script pre-Islamic Arabs used in this region centuries before the rise of Islam. A couple of Greek inscriptions as well, but very nice. So, of course, we don't have time to read everything in the field. There's just too much. So we photograph everything, document, GPS, all that business. And we take our man back to the car so that he can have his water and relax. And, you know, a little bit, I told you so. You cut our day short. Fine. We come back home. We start processing the data. And what happens? I'm looking at what we discovered from this. We discovered at this cairn the first mention of the term Arab as a term of self-identification among the Safaitic Bedouin, or Safaitic nomads. Bedouin's an anachronistic term, excuse me. Nomads, very important. We'll talk about this later, of course. At the same cairn, we discovered the Isa inscription, right? The first mention. It's two huge discoveries. How did we make that discovery? By complete accident. One of our guys ran out of water. We took a shortcut. Accidental discovery, huge scientific implications, right? So look at that. That's a fantastic. Now, we also discover things deliberately by making very close plans, but I like the serendipity of discovery as well. So, you know, based on what I told you, how could you not be interested, right? This stuff is endlessly fascinating, right? So it keeps me going. I'm completely in love with this material in the field. Yeah.
Yeah, I would have to second that. I'm completely in love with it too. I haven't gone on any excavations or done any field work, but just from what I've been reading, looking at the inscriptions and what they contribute to our knowledge of pre-Islamic Arabia, just because from my background, I've always been interested in pre-Islamic Arabia. I mean, I'm a practicing Muslim and I'm interested in the history of Islam. And so if you want to know about the history of Islam, where to start? Pre-Islamic Arabia. But then you only can read so much of the literature and it only tells you so much. And the study of inscriptions has just opened up a totally different world, or a new world, or a world that has been kind of uncovered that you won't get just by reading the literature. So, you know, I second that on finding these things extremely interesting because of what they add to the conversation or our understanding. So did you have any mentors or role models who influenced your decision to specialize in epigraphy? If so, could you tell us about their impact or on your career?
Well, we are living. I have a tremendous admiration for all my colleagues who are working in this field. We are sort of in a golden age now. We have fantastic scholars doing excellent field work, but also brilliant analyses and historical work. It would really take too long to list everyone who I appreciate. Obviously, who I consider my personal mentor in the field of Arabian history and epigraphy, dear friend Michael McDonald. I admire his work, of course, but he's also a tremendous human being and a role model for anyone who wants to be a scholar. Right? He's really the entire package. Right? He's an amazing man. But I also, of course, I have wonderful things to say about everyone I work with. It's a very long list of people. I speak daily about scientific topics with people like Marijn van Putten, Sean Anthony, Haytham Sidqi. I mean, all these names that you probably know. These are individuals, Leila Nermia. These are people that I have continuous conversations with about science, and ideas grow and mature through these discussions. And of course, the list can get very long as well. Yeah.
Since you started, do you find more and more people becoming interested in the field since you started? Because it seems like, just from my perspective, last 10 years of really looking at Islamic history, at first, I never heard anybody talking about these things, the epigraphy, and I've always kind of been tapped into what has been going on in academia, at least with the people I engaged with. But it seems like in the last 5 years, things have really exploded.
Pre-Islamic Arabia is a very hot topic now, and lots of people are doing amazing work in this field. Of course, Islamic origins as well. I don't consider myself a scholar of Islam. I don't work directly on issues of Islamic studies. And I may have some things to say that might help those who are doing more serious work on Islamic origins. But I consider myself primarily a scholar of pre-Islamic Arabia. And in the field of pre-Islamic Arabia, it's definitely booming. There are many archaeological projects, epigraphic projects being done across Saudi Arabia now. Yemen, and before the crisis, had a lot of work being done there as well, Jordan as well. And so we are just getting a flood of data. All right. And it's going to take generations to survey, for example, all of Arabia and to carry out these interesting projects. But it will also take generations to process all of this data, synthesize it, understand it, and write historical and incorporate them in the writing of historical narratives. Yeah. So it's a golden age right now, like I said. Yeah.
Well, I'm excited to see what else the epigraphists uncover because, like you mentioned, I mean, it just says a lot. And hearing what is being said about Arabia from Arabians, I believe, is very much integral, and that's exactly what it contributes. So just moving on to Arabic and Arab identity pre-Islam, what was the distribution of Arabic language prior to the rise of Islam? Was Arabic widespread in Eastern and Southern Arabia? And what does the epigraphic evidence tell us?
It's a very, very nicely put question, but a very complex question, right? And we could probably spend the whole interview distilling all the different aspects of that question. but I'll try to be a little brief here. It depends on when you say before Islam. Right? Before Islam is a very long period. Immediately before Islam is a different story than, let's say, 1,000 years before Islam. And so we'll talk about both of those ends of the chronological spectrum. So, but the first thing, before even approaching this question, is to ask, what do we mean? What does it mean at all to say the Arabic language? Now, we have to come to a definition of Arabic. All right. And there are multiple ways of defining the Arabic language. For example, there are speakers. I watched a clip of a documentary recently about people who speak the Mehri language from Oman. All right. Now, this is, for linguists, this is not a form of Arabic at all. It's an independent Semitic language. We're called modern South Arabian by linguists. It's not mutually intelligible with Arabic, but that's sort of irrelevant. Mutual intelligibility doesn't always matter. But grammatically, lexically, and in many other ways, this is definitely not a form of Arabic. But in this interview, many speakers of this language were saying that they speak the real Arabic, that they speak Arabic, the real Arabic, and it's the origin of Arabic, in fact. All right. So socially, for them, their language is Arabic. But that's so, we can't really ask that question of material we have in the past, which people called their language or considered their language to be Arabic. We don't know that. What we have are examples of languages. And so what we need to answer the question that you've asked, what's the distribution of Arabic, is to come to a linguistic definition of Arabic, a formal definition, not one that's based on geography or social factors like I just mentioned, but rather a rather dry and formal definition of a language. And the way linguists do that is it's very similar to the way biological classification proceeds. What you do is you want to say, all right, we want to define a language separately or to contrast it with other related languages in the same family. So we know Arabic is related to Hebrew, is related to Aramaic, is related to Ge'ez, to Ethiopic, to Grenia, related to these modern South Arabian languages, to Akkadian. Okay, they're all related. They're all one family. Why is Hebrew not Arabic then? Why is Aramaic not Arabic? Why do we call them different languages, right? And it's not due to script. You can write any language in any script. It's not due to geography. Languages can be spoken anywhere. So why do we call them that? And the reason we do is we look at their grammatical profile. We try to isolate grammatical features that are unique to certain clusters of languages. And the sharing of those unique grammatical features implies that a certain group of languages has a common ancestor, descends from a single, let's say, parent language. Okay. So then we ask, let's look at classical Arabic, let's look at the Quran, let's look at the modern dialects, look at all the things that we know that we call Arabic. Do all of these languages that we call Arabic share a common set of grammatical innovations, grammatical features that distinguish them from all other Semitic languages? And they do, and you can list them. Okay. So then you take that list. Now you have a formal definition of Arabic, okay? It's so formal that, in fact, the label Arabic for it is completely arbitrary. You could call it anything you want, but no matter what you call it, the result would be the vernacular spoken in Egypt, the vernacular spoken in Iraq, the vernacular spoken in Najd, the vernacular spoken in Sana'a, the Quran, the language of the ancient poetry, the language of medieval Abbasid literature. All of these things, no matter what you call them, have a common grammatical profile that implies that they are more closely related to each other than they are to other Semitic languages, and that they are a family. And that family we call Arabic for, of course, historical reasons. It's obvious, right? Now, we take that, let's say, objective, okay, maybe objective is too strong, but we take that formal definition and we look at the pre-Islamic epigraphic record, right? All of these languages that are attested across the Arabian Peninsula, from Yemen to Syria. We have tens of thousands of texts. we ask the question, do these texts that we see, do they share the same grammatical profile with what we're calling Arabic? And that's how we can know about the distribution of Arabic in pre-Islamic times, right? We're looking for, in this sea of languages, examples of or varieties that share or have the same grammatical profile as what we know as Arabic. And when you do that,
I guess a better question would be, then what does the epigraphic evidence tell us about the distribution of language across Arabia?
Yeah, fantastic. But did you follow the argument I made so far?
Definitely.
Excellent.
Definitely.
Perfect. So then we have our definition of Arabic. Now, in the in later Islamic period historiographical works or folkloric works, even if you want to call them that, you can. We've received this myth that the Arabic language emerges from Yemen, right? Yemen is the origin of the Arabic language, and all the Arabs come from Yemen. There's a great deluge, right? So you can talk about an antediluvian period where all the Arabs were in Yemen. Then the dam collapses. You have the huge flood, and then you distribution, right? Everyone flees everywhere, and that's how Arabic gets everywhere. That's the conventional popular story most people have. Using this linguistic approach, when you look at the epigraphic languages of Yemen, those that are attested from as early as the late 2nd millennium BC, very early, up until the 6th century. Okay, when you look at these languages, and there are 4 principal languages, there are many dialects or different dialects and registers and what have you, what you discover is that none of these languages shares the grammatical profile that we've defined for Arabic. That is, in linguistic terms, none of these languages are what we would call Arabic. Well, someone might say, hey, your definition's too narrow. You need to widen your definition to include them because they are Arabs. So your definition of Arabic needs to include them. And you can do that. You can widen your definition of Arabic to include them. But in widening your definition of Arabic to include them, you also end up including Hebrew and Aramaic. So they also end up Arabic as well. So then the label doesn't make any sense anymore. It's too wide, right? It's not. So you don't widen it to include them. That's using a historical argument to influence a linguistic definition. We're not going to do that. We're going to stick with our linguistic definition, and that results in fact, and it is a fact, that the ancient languages of Yemen are not ancestral to Arabic, nor do they descend from the same common ancestor as the language of the Quran. That's amazing, right? Because that sort of turns our history of Arabic upside down. All right, we conventionally think, well, of course, there are multiple narratives in Islamic historiographical sources. Not everyone says Arabic comes from Yemen, but that's the most popular one, And so that narrative sort of gets turned upside down. Fine, great. So where do we find Arabic? Well, the earliest inscription that I think we can point to that has let's say, undeniable Arabic isoglosses is dated to the mid 1st millennium BC from around Dumat al-Jandal. All right, it's an inscription mentioning the king Nabonidus, and that inscription very likely, it's always likely, right? Very likely exhibits tenween. All right, for those who know about Arabic grammar, tenween are these ends that occur at the end of words that are not bound, that don't have the definite article, and that are not, let's say, having suffixes on them or whatever. And this is an Arabic innovation. So this inscription seems to have that, which is very interesting. But there's an even earlier text that comes from Bayer, Jordan. All right, it's a very, very nice inscription carved in what is probably to be classified as the Thamudic B script. And there are many, many scripts across Arabia. We don't need to get into that. And this text contains an invocation to the Iron Age gods of the Transjordan. It's linguistically very difficult, but the language of the text is very similar to what we get later in the Safaitic inscriptions. And it's very likely our oldest example of the Arabic language. This text is, well, we can't date it directly. It's not dated. It doesn't mention any historical figures, but it talks about these three Iron Age Transjordanian deities, the deities of Ammon, Moab, and Edom. So very likely composed when these kingdoms were flourishing, so probably the early part of the first millennium BC. And the text was carved on the same stone as a Canaanite inscription, but it was carved before it. The Canaanite inscription is carved under it and avoids its letters. And paleographically, the Canaanite inscription needs some real study, but paleographically, it's very similar to, let's say, the Canaanite script as it was used in the Transjordan area in the early part of the first millennium BC. So we're probably talking about our earliest examples of Arabic being in this, I would say, probably stretching from North Arabia, from Dumat al-Janda, this part of the area of North Arabia, up to Hawran in Jordan, right, in this area. And it's not a coincidence then that our Assyrian guys and later Babylonians are referring to the people that inhabit this area as Arab, or Aribi, or Arab, or what have you. We can talk about that later as well. But they're referring to these people here as Arabs. When they name them, they very often have names that are etymologically Arabic, right? So all of these independent things sort of line up, and we are starting to recognize a, let's say, linguistic and cultural complex that we might identify with Arabs in this northern area, right? So from northern Saudi Arabia to Hawran, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that was like the number one thing that really blew my mind, was to find out that Arabic didn't exist all throughout Arabia since time immemorial. I remember seeing maps where most of Arabia was Arabic speaking. The bottom part was Himyaric. And then when I would ask questions on, well, what is Himyar? Is it like Arabic? The explanation I would get from non-experts was it was Arabic, but they used different letters. But it still sounded the same, and they still were able to understand each other. But then I came across your work, and that just totally, like what you said, turned the geographical history of Arabic right upside down, because a lot of what we know of Arabic seems to be concentrated up north, like what you said with Safaitic and with inscriptions from dating all the way back to the Assyrians.
Yes. Now, this is where chronology comes in. This is very important. So I'm talking about first millennium BC, early part of the first millennium CE, okay? So Safaitic, we don't really have good dates for Safaitic, but let's say Safaitic sort of terminates in the 4th century or what have you, right? CE, fine. So I'm talking about this period. Now, in the 6th century, this is the shift. This is what we want to explain. In the 6th century, the Arabic language and the Arabic script, the proper Arabic script, none of these examples that I'm talking about, none of these inscriptions that I've mentioned previously are carved in the Arabic script. The Arabic script hadn't even evolved yet, okay? But by the 6th century, the Arabic script, the Arabic language and the Arabic script is attested from Syria to Najran, north of Yemen, across the whole western part of the Arabian Peninsula. All right. All of these, so in former centuries, so for example, the language expressed in these various ancient Talmudic scripts that through Central Arabia, the language expressed in Hijaz, some of them are very close to Arabic, some of them are quite exotic, and we can't understand what the texts are saying. All of that material disappears. And what you have is linguistic script, in terms of script to writing system, unity, all right, linguistic unity, and the stretching from Syria to Najran in the 6th century. So something happened. This is the shadow of some political change, obviously. This is the shadow of maybe demographic change. This is the shadow of something, but something does change, right? And so by the 6th century, all of the Arabian Peninsula, except for Yemen, well, okay, let me qualify that. West Arabia, maybe Central Arabia, but certainly West Arabia, from Syria to Najran, is using the Arabic language and the Arabic script. Yemen, probably not yet, and it takes a while for it to become Arabized. East Arabia, we just don't have any evidence. In ancient times, so we go back to BCE, they had languages that were not Arabic, very clearly. All right, so the language attested in the Hasidic inscriptions, it's not Arabic, and we can demonstrate that. I wrote a small, in my article, What is Ancient North Arabian? I just go through all of the different corpora and try to describe their linguistic features, and you can read about what's in the Hasidic inscriptions there. They're definitely not Arabic. But in the 6th century, we have no idea. There are no inscriptions discovered from the 6th century in East Arabia yet. But it's very plausible that what happened in West Arabia also happened in East Arabia. And so by the 6th century, Arabia was more or less just completely Arabic speaking and using one kind of script. Yeah.
So just going back in the pre-Islamic period, what does that mean for Arab identity, being that the Arabic language, as we understand it from other from inscriptions, what does that mean for widespread Arab identity? I know in Imagining the Arabs, Dr. Peter Webb mentioned that despite the linguistic uniformity of Safaitic graffiti as an example, your research has highlighted diversity within the social groups of the writers of Arabic during this time. Some of these writers even self-identified as Nabateans, a group with its own unique language and script. Does this observation challenge the notion that there was a strong overarching Arab identity already in pre-Islamic Arabia, given what Peter Webb has mentioned in his book?
I admire Peter Webb. He's a fantastic scholar.
And I have to just add this right here. It was your work that really introduced me to this argument, but then I was watching a lecture of yours, and you had referenced something from his work that, pre-Islamic Arabia was basically like a blank canvas, and then you referenced his book, and then that turned me onto his book, and I became very interested in his work, and then so I just have to kind of pick your brain about this a little bit.
Yeah, very good. No, I love the opportunity to engage with Peter Webb. He's a very nice guy. We are former colleagues. We worked together at Leiden, lots of conversations. Big admirers. Book has many merits, especially in trying to understand how Arab identity evolves and transforms in the Islamic period. Other works, how the Yemenis became Arab, right? That's a very interesting question, and treated very nicely. But on the matter of pre-Islamic Arab identity, I have to say I cannot follow his argumentation. I am not convinced by it. And of course, we need to deal in periods. But let's go to the most ancient period. You have, the Assyrians are mentioning people that they're calling Arabs. These people also have Arabic names. There are inscriptions produced in the same area that are in the Arabic language. That's all of these different pieces are sort of fitting together. It's really unlikely that these people, would not have identified in some kind of, wouldn't have used Arab as a form of self-identification of some sort. Now, Arab has never been, has always been sort of a macro identity. There have always been, tribal identities subsumed under Arab, regional identities, so Arab was never the primary identity of any group. It was always a macro identity. All right. And that's what we have to keep in mind. Okay. So when our Safaitic writers, this is what's very interesting. Our Safaitic writers, they never identify as, they never say this, this is by so-and-so, son of so-and-so, son of so-and-so, the Arab, right? They would never do that because it would make no sense. It has no meaning. It has no meaning at all, right? It's like, if I were to think of it sort of in a come way, if I were carving an inscription, Ahmed, son of Ahmad Al-Jallad, whatever, the human. Okay. I mean, what's obviously, right? So I think for them, they would have, so they identify primarily by tribe or, in the case of Nabateans, and I would come back and say, hold on now, Nabateans are not different than Arabs, but Nabatean could very well be one of these sub-identities under a macro identity of Arab, right? Their neighbors call them Arabs, and their vernacular, the language that they spoke, not necessarily wrote, was Arabic, a form of Arabic. So we'll get back into the Nabateans. So in this period, there's probably a macro identity that these people are identifying as, and that's what's interesting about the Safaitic inscription. So they never say, I'm the Arab, I am so-and-so the Arab. But that's not an argument that they're not Arabs. That's not an argument at all. You can't say because they don't call themselves Arabs in their inscriptions that they didn't identify as Arabs. And so in the Safaitic, in some way, and the Safaitic inscriptions that I published back in, I don't remember, was it 2020? I think 2020. We have two texts by brothers, and they are dating their inscription to a drought, which is very common. They don't have numbered years. They date to things that happened that were significant. These guys decide to date to the year drought afflicted the Arab, right? Which is everyone living, all of the tribes. You see, it's not just afflicted the Raif tribe or the Amarat tribe, or no, it inflicted all of us, right? So it gives us this idea that they're using this term Arab to refer to the collection of all these tribes that are living there, right? But no one's going to identify as that. You identify by your tribe. But if you wanted to refer to your cultural linguistic complex, all these guys, these people living out there, they could use the term Arab to do that, which is very similar to what how Arab is used in later sources, right? Now, here's the example. Because someone doesn't use the term Arab in their inscription in Arabia, in their language, for their public, does that mean that they don't identify as Arabs? Well, let's try to do an experiment. There are thousands upon thousands of inscriptions carved in the deserts, in the basalt desert surrounding Medina. Okay, these are Islamic period inscriptions. These date from the first, several centuries of Islam. Thousands. Okay, people identify in these inscriptions. They identify themselves. Names. They're all in the Arabic script. They're pious inscriptions. God forgive so and so. God have mercy on so and so. Very typical Islamic inscriptions. Fine. People identify in these texts. They identify how? Genealogy. Fulan bin Fulan bin Fulan. They identify by tribe. Okay? Thaqafi, whatever. Al-Ansari. Sometimes by larger tribal affiliations. They identify sometimes being Mawali, Maulas of some people. There is not a single text from this corpus, not a single one, where somebody says the Arab, Al-Arabi. Now, would I be correct in saying this proves that 3rd century Hijra inhabitants of Medina did not identify as Arabs? No, that would be an absurd argument. That would be completely absurd. There is absolutely no point for them to write that. So making an argument based on the absence of someone calling themselves an Arab in an inscription in Arabia to an Arab audience is not an argument for the absence of Arab identity. It's not. Whereas at the same time, all of their neighbors are calling them Arabs. The Greeks, the Jews, all that they're calling them Arabs. Not only are they calling them Arabs, right? They're not just calling them Arabs. There's another thing that's also very nice. Okay, so for example, Uranius, the 4th century, he's talking about the Arabs, and he also refers to something called He Arabon Pone, the Arab language, the language of the Arabs. Okay, so he recognizes there's a specific language associated with them, right? It's called the language of the Arabs, right? Epiphanius of Salamis, 4th century as well, reports that the inhabitants of Elusa and the Negev sang hymns to their goddess in Arabique dialecto. What is that? In the Arabic, basically in Arabic, in the Arabic language, in Arabic. So so it's not just that they're Arabs. They're not just calling them Arabs. They're also calling their language Arabic.
Interesting.
Okay, so we need really strong evidence that these people weren't self-identifying as Arabic, because they've got Arabic names. They're using a language that's called Arabic, that we would call Arabic. In the Safaitic case, they're calling the collection of tribes Arabs. In addition to that, other people are calling them Arabs and also calling their language Arabic. All right, so how much more do you want? So you got to play with that. Now, that's in the north. Let's go to South Arabia. Let's look at the South now. The South Arabians of pre-Islamic times did not identify themselves as Arabs. They didn't. That's clear. And they didn't speak Arabic either. But they did identify people as Arabs, Arab and Araban, and those were the people to their north. And they named tribes like Ma'ad, okay, Kinda. these tribes that we know, they call them Arabs. Okay, so that's from South Arabia. They're calling them Arabs. And of course, you have, in one of Abraha's inscription, he talks about the Arab that also includes East Arabia. He talks about all the Arab from Arabia. Okay, very interesting. So everyone north of them in the 6th century, they're calling Arab. So that's what they're doing. Now you can play games with that. You can say, well, Arab here doesn't mean Arabs. It means Bedouin or military, irregular military unit, whatever you like. Okay, fine. So the South Arabians are calling the Ma'ad Arab. Okay, very good. Let's go back to North Arabia. Let's look at the inscription of Imru al-Qais bar Amru, right? He is the king of all the Arabs, right? Malik al-Arab kullah. Okay, very nice. Some people have tried to play games and make al-Arab there mean other things. Nothing is convincing, and it doesn't work. He is literally king of all the Arabs.
Try to make Malik mean other things in the case of Webb's work.
Yeah, yeah.
Which I found convincing at once upon a time. I'm not the expert, so I have to, rely on you guys.
No, I mean, that phrase, Malik al-Arab, is attested in Aramaic inscriptions from northern Mesopotamia as well as a title. There were many Malik king of the Arabs. So this is not it doesn't occur only in the Namara inscription, right? It's a known phrase, right? You have to take that into, so then you have to say, well, it means something there different, and what do you start doing, right? You're not arguing with the evidence, you're arguing against the evidence. You got your conclusion, you argue against the evidence. That's not the good way of doing things. So fine, you've got the king of all the Arabs, and he lists who the Arabs are. Who's among that list? Ma'ad. So South Arabia and North Arabia are both calling the same tribe Arab. Two different witnesses. Okay?
I've known that, and I never thought about that. That
yeah,
the top they're attesting Arabs, the bottom they're attesting Arabs.
And they're talking about the same groups. Yeah, corroborating each other. Yeah.
How are they corroborating? Wow, I never, even though I known that. That's wow. That's well, I guess then I don't need to ask the question of how come when they some of these outsiders became more familiar with Arabia, they started to identify them as their tribal names more so than the macro. But you kind of in what in everything you just said, that that was the macro identity. They become more familiar with these people, then they just identify. Same way as somebody would probably, if they looked at me from afar, say that black guy, and then if they come and talk to me, oh, he's Tehran. And the more they come to know about me, the more they're able to identify me on a more personal level.
Yeah, and it shows an increasing awareness of these groups, right? And an interest in their, absolutely, I agree with you. And even this idea of, for example, in the Quran, where the Quran has polemics against the Arab, right? And it seems to refer to people outside the city, the Bedouin, right? That doesn't mean that the inhabitants inside the city didn't identify as Arabs. You find the same thing. You go, I had this situation when I do work in Jordan. I'm in Amman, and I'm doing work, and out in the Badia, and I'm talking to a Jordanian who's a city guy, and he's like, "Oh, you're working with those Urban." Right? So the pejorative term, and he means the Bedouin, right? Now that Jordanian also is going to identify as an Arab, but he has a separate term to refer to the Bedouin Arab. All right. And and they both speak the Arabic language as well, right? That's all that, but there's still this kind of dynamic between settled people and nomadic people. And I think that's what's being captured in the Quran. It isn't that, look, they're using Arab to refer to people other than themselves. It's a bit more complicated than that. And again, like going back, one of the arguments is that the phrase in the Quran, Arabi Mubin, right? That this doesn't refer to clear Arabic language, but rather Arabi here means an adjective that means clear or something of that sort. Again, we have all these people referring to the Arabic language, calling it the Arabic language in other languages. But I think in the Quranic context, if you read very closely, it certainly means the Arabic language, and that's the significance of it. This is scripture in the vernacular, right, that people get. And I think that that's a line of argumentation that needs to be explored further, right? One of the significance, let's say, innovations of the Quran in its religious landscape is that it was offering vernacular scripture, right? That everyday people could understand. That's the idea, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ, right? So that you get it. It's in your language so that you get it, right? So it's really the name of the language, huh? It's the name of the language. It's Arabic, and of course, that's what we get in the early Islamic period. And I would say that the early Islamic period, much of these ideas, it does transform. Arabic identity transforms, Arabic language transforms. All of that happens in the Islamic period, but the kernel of it, the core elements of it, are continuations from pre-Islamic ideas. Yeah.
Okay, so it wasn't just with the coming of Islam that the whole that Arabic identity came about. It existed pre-Islam. It still existed into Islam, but of course, and this is where the second part of Peter Webb's book, which I still has quite a bit of merit, talks about the development of Arabic identity and how it understood through Muslim scholarship and stuff like that.
Absolutely. So, and in Islamic period, that's when the Yemenis become Arabs. That's when the Yemenis become the origin of the Arabs. So there's all kinds of fun stuff happening in the Islamic period, right? There's lots of really good stuff happening in the Islamic period. Now, I'm going to push this a little bit further, really to hammer this point home, because we have this opportunity. I mentioned in the 6th century the transformations that happened, right? We said in the first millennium BC, we have a diverse landscape of languages and scripts all across the peninsula. By the 6th century, look what we have in the 6th century. We have one script that's attested from Najran to Syria. That script attests one language, which is what we would all, without any difficulty, call Arabic. Not only does it attest one language, it attests one calendar, one system of reckoning time. They use the era of Bosra. That's it. That's the only era that's attested from Najran, Dumat al-Jandal, Jordan, Syria, all of these places. They're using one era. Very important. They also have the same formulaic stock phrases. They're using the same vocabulary. It's not just the same language, but they're even expressing themselves in the same. Okay? All of that being used from Najran to Syria strongly implies some degree of cultural uniformity. All right? These people are not random, disconnected communities doing their own things and by accident having all of this in common. There is some kind of cultural uniformity in the 6th century that didn't exist earlier. All right? And so I think it's very likely as well that this macro identity Arab goes along with that phenomenon. Okay? And that's what we're being told. Now, the million-dollar question that I don't think we can answer in any convincing way at the moment with the data we have is what led to that? Right. How did that, because this is before Islam. So there's no overarching single political power controlling the whole Arabia and forcing this from the top down. So how did it happen? How did Arabia become homogenous in the 6th century? Excluding Yemen.
Question.
That's a million, and I don't think we can answer it yet. I mean, people have some ideas that there's a role of Christianity. These are speculation, maybe so, right? Maybe they're part of the answer. We just don't have all the evidence we need to convincingly answer that question.
Right. Yeah. And I know I tried, or Robert Hoyland tried at the end of his book, Arabs, Arabias. I'm going to butcher the title, but I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. And after reading that last chapter on how the Arabian Peninsula became Arabized, I just wasn't satisfied. And even now, I haven't found anything to kind of lead me in a direction to where we can know for certain what exactly happened. But, you know, this whole discussion of Arab identity, the Arabic language, how it spread across the geographical area known as Arabia is a fascinating topic. We could do a whole podcast on these things. And, you know, I'm really thankful for the work that not only yourself, but Peter Webb and many of your other colleagues have put out on the subject, because it really is interesting. And you guys have made it extremely interesting, to be honest. So, yeah, just to move forward,
in terms of sort of the academic field around epigraphy, why do you think inscriptural evidence has been so previously underutilized in academic studies, particularly when trying to reconstruct pre-Islamic beliefs and faith?
That's a very good question. I would say that traditionally speaking, you have different, so people who are working in Islamic history are trained with Islamic sources. They're trained as Islamicists. So they have different sources. Their expertise pertains to that. And they rely primarily on that material to understand the past. People who work with epigraphy are closer to archaeology. They're not Islamicists as such. And so their work, the two fields don't overlap very much. So they've sort of been autonomous. Now, there are cases of someone like Freddie Beeston, who was a fantastic epigraphist, but also a master of the Islamic sources, brought them together. So there are individuals who have done that in the past. But generally speaking, like, for example, if I go and I study, if in former times, if I went and studied Islamic studies and wanted to work on early Islamic history, part of my training would not traditionally have been ancient South Arabian. I wouldn't have learned ancient South Arabian. I wouldn't have access to any of that. It just wouldn't be there, right? So it's also very interesting. The same change is happening in Quranic studies. In former times, people who did Quranic studies would have immersed themselves in things like tafsir and Islamic traditional engagements with the Quran. But it's very common today that someone doing Islamic studies is also studying Syriac, maybe Greek, Ethiopic. They're looking at late antique literature. So this is a change that's happened in sort of widening the scope and contextualizing, let's say, the Quran in its late antique context. So for pre-Islamic Arabia, I think that shift is changing as well, and understanding pre-Islamic Arabia through pre-Islamic Arabian sources. What has also challenged people in the past too is South Arabia there have been fantastic editions and stuff for South Arabia. You could work with that material very well. But with North Arabia, it was very difficult to not only access the material, but to process it. A lot of the stuff was, let's say, difficult to handle volumes. They're not edited well. I'm trying to look at an example here, but to bring to you to show you, but it doesn't matter. Hand drawings, the texts are poorly edited. You read the text, they don't make any sense. So it just seems like it's not very useful. So what we've done in the last, let's say, 10 years is to systematically approach these corpora and to try to synthesize the information and tell a story, right? At least that's what I tried to do with my book on Safaitic religion, right? So these are real, to use Islamic vocabulary, Jahili Arabs, all right? So let's figure out what their religious life ways look like, using their sources, okay? So I tried to gather everything that had to do with religion in this huge corpus and organize it, synthesize it, and present it. Hopefully it's a good starting point for people, so that people working on pre-Islamic society and religion, they can take a book and say, okay, look, this is a good synthesis that presents us with the data. We can build on this. You see what I mean? So that's what's happening now. We're getting these synthesis, grammars, dictionaries, books like this, databases, right? Michael McDonald has this fantastic database that he runs, Oceana, that's just filled with fantastic stuff. But it's very easy to misuse stuff like that. I recently read an article where somebody was talking about Samad before Islam, and he just wrote the word Samad into Oceana. And he's like, look, it's attested in Taymanidic. He found a word Sad, Mim, Dal, Ain. And he's like, here it is. And it's, well, no, that's, if you know anything about Taymanidic grammar, that Sad, Mim there is actually the way they would spell their deity Salm, Sad, Lam, Mim. And that Dal, Ain at the end is the verb Da'a, which means to call, has nothing to do with Samad in the Quran. So, these databases are available, but they can also be very dangerous because you can misuse them if you're uninitiated. But at least people are being interested, right? And the material is there and more accessible now. So what we're seeing, I think, and this is what I kind of present to my students as well, is the Jahiliyyah and pre-Islamic Arabia are two different places. They're two different places. You can study the Jahiliyyah. You can read, Islamic period sources like Wahab bin Munabbih. You can read Ubayd bin Sharia and these kinds of guys who are talking about pre-Islamic Arabia. They're talking about the Jahiliyyah. Okay? That is, there are obviously elements of reality in there, but in general, that's storyland. All right? That's a very different place than the pre-Islamic Arabia that you excavate and that you document on rocks and rock faces and things of that pre-Islamic Arabia is a very different place. And there can be two disciplines, one that studies the literary pre-Islamic Arabia, the Jahiliyyah, and one that engages with the documentary and archaeological evidence. Yeah.
In terms of the literary pre-Islamic Arabia, one of the main sources that people refer to is Ibn al-Kabi's Book of Idols and others. What elements are noticeably absent from sources like the Book of Idols that can instead be found in the evidence that you rely upon, particularly in like reconstructing the religious worldview of the region? And what were the goals of the works like that literature that would have shaped how they presented their material?
Yeah, so there's a lot of correspondence between what you get in the Book of Idols and what you get in the what you get in the how do you do it? Sorry, I had someone at my door. Send them away. There's a lot of correspondences between what you get in the Book of Idols and what you get in the Safaitic inscriptions. So, for example, like sacrifices, like sacred stones, pilgrimages. But anyone who's familiar with ancient Near Eastern religion will realize that these are just common features of ancient Near Eastern religion, right? Everyone does this. So it's not surprising that we're going to find those commonalities, because we will find those things in the Bible. We'll find them in other ancient cultures. So not too surprising. What's different, in my opinion, this is something that I thought about a little bit, is that Ibn al-Kalbi doesn't seem to know who these gods are. That is, he has the names, but we have no stories about them. We have no mythology. We don't know what their role in the cosmos. We don't know anything about them, right? They're just names. This tribe had this idol, and they would sacrifice or flow blood on her and what have you. And sometimes you get fantastic stories too, ones that are probably ones that, if you are operating in a historical framework, would be considered legendary, right? Like the battles between Khalid bin Walid and Al-Uzza, right? So this is a nice scene, but it's legend, it's entertainment. Now, let's see. Let's talk about one goddess. This is the great ancient goddess of the Arabs, who is Allat. All right, Allat. We all know Allat now. Who is she? Who is she? We can actually now answer that question in a very good way. And the answer, when I first arrived at the answer, gave me goosebumps. I need to publish the full answer. I haven't done it yet. So for Ibn al-Kalbi, Allat is the not the most ancient deity of the Arabs, right? She's not the most ancient, but she was worshipped by them, and her center of worship was in the Taif. Okay. Very cool, very nice. Now, I've surveyed extensively at Taif. We found both pre-Islamic Arabic inscriptions, right? Very nice, very important material that we can talk about later. But we've also documented a significant corpus of pre-Islamic Thamudic inscriptions. So these are texts that go back even further in the past. Anyway, in our entire corpus, Allat doesn't appear once. She's just not there. But she's just not there. Okay. Oh, what's going on here? Well, so there are legends, and they need to situate the gods somewhere. All right. And so maybe she just ends up there for some reason. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that, but she's just not there, which is interesting. Not there in the personal names either, right? There's no like Abdullah or anything of this sort. Fine. No problem. You can always say, well, the epigraphic record is incomplete. It's always incomplete. Everything in the past is incomplete. So you can always appeal to the fact that the past is incomplete to explain away discrepancies. And if that's the way you want to go, you can go that way. That's fine. But there's another issue that's very interesting about Allat, is that, Ibn al-Kalbi describes her. She's an idol, this. We don't know anything about who she is. The Quran implies in this knowledge that she was considered a daughter of Allah, right? With Al-Uzza and Manoh, right? So they are daughters of Allah. Fine, great. But who is she? What is her mythology? What's her role in the cosmos? What does she do? I mean, she's a god of pagans. She has to have a story, right? There has to be something. So we don't get any of that. If there were certainly stories, but none of that information seems to have survived or have been of interest enough to even invent for someone like Ibn al-Kalbi. All right, so we don't have any of that. We turn to the Safaitic inscriptions. There we find Allat. Okay, she's tested. She's by far the most popular deity in the inscriptions, tested more than 1,400 times. She is called Bint Ruthaw. She is the daughter of the god Ruthaw. All right, now this is very important. Ruthaw is a very interesting deity. All right, we're going to talk about him in a bit. So she's his daughter. Okay, very interesting. So also, you could make the argument that she is the mother of the Nabatean god Vushare.
Wow.
All right, so we've got like 3 generations of a family. Amazing, huh? Let's go further. She has the title. She has the title Malikat Sarai. So she is the queen of fertility and abundance. All right. And you say, okay. So in 2000, I don't know what it was, 19. Anyway, I published maybe 20. I published an article on this guy, Ruthal. And Ruthal, the ancient Arabians had an epithet for him. They called him the one from Chaldea. Minkasht. He's the one from Chaldea. Okay, interesting. So if he's from Chaldea and his daughter is Allat, I made the hypothesis in this paper that maybe we can connect Allat to Ishtar, to Venus, to the morning, to the sun. And Allat is simply what? It's simply an epithet, the goddess. So they're not calling Ishtar anymore by her name, but they're just simply calling her the goddess. Now that was a hypothesis. I said maybe. I don't have the evidence. Maybe that's what the evidence is pointing to. Some weeks ago, a colleague posted on the internet a Thamudic bee invocation. Thamudic bee is from North Arabia, an invocation that calls out to Bint Ruthal, just Bint Ruthal. So, daughter of Ruthal. It's like, okay, this is Allat. Very nice. I wrote my colleague and dear friend, Jérôme Norris, very nice guy, brilliant epigraphist, really talented guy, amazing. And I wrote him, I said, look, we have this could be an epithet of Allat and Thamudic bee. He's like, I don't think it's an epithet of Allat and Thamudic bee. I said, why? He's like, there's an inscription that was published on the internet. Lots of this stuff is just on the internet, right? You've got to find it. That has an invocation that says what? Attar Samay bint Ruthal. Oh, Attar Samay bint Ruthal. What is Attar Samay? This is a goddess in the Thamudic bee inscriptions. It literally means Ishtar of the sky. And it says, oh, Ishtar of the sky, daughter of Ruthal. So what do we see in the evolution of this? The Arabs had the veneration of Ishtar, Ashtar. She gets called by an epithet, the goddess, which becomes Allat. The epithet replaces the ancient name. And that's what becomes popular at the end of the first millennium BCE, first millennium AD, beginning of the first millennium AD. That's where she just gets called the goddess, but it's an epithet of Ishtar. She's dealing with fertility and abundance and all this kind of wonderful stuff. And then, of course, it ends up in Kitab al-Aslam. It ends up in Taif, but we don't have any of that historical information. It's all lost, right? But the inscriptions allow us to sort of now we know her story. She's the Arabian Ashtar, the Ishtar. Amazing, yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah,
that is so fascinating. In terms of like the disconnection then between sort of the Islamic era Muslim sources for pre-Islamic Arabia, would they almost be considered outsider sources in terms of their limitations?
So one of the things that really I like to speculate. I use the classroom as an opportunity to kind of speculate with students, right? And so we were talking about Abbasid period antiquarianism. Right? You have to grow up people interested in the past, especially in South Arabia. You have a real interest in the ancient kings of Himyar, South Arabians, right? And these are their, you can use these terms, these are their descendants. These are South Arabians. They are Himyarites in a sense, but by this time they're Arabized, they speak Arabic and what have you. But they are interested in South Arabia's pre-Islamic past, distant past, all right? They have access to what they call the Himyarite language, which seems to be some hybrid of ancient South Arabian and Arabic. It's hard to say. We have only a few lines and words preserved in the Islamic tradition of what this language was. But what's also interesting is that these antiquarians had knowledge of the script of ancient South Arabia. So they knew the ancient South Arabian script, what we call the Musnad, right? The Arabic alphabet that was used in ancient South Arabia, and they had script charts. So they would draw the South Arabian letter and they say this corresponds to Alif. They would draw the other letter, say this corresponds to Ba, and the charts are right. They're correct. They knew the script. They could read it. You even have a small number of Islamic period inscriptions of people writing their names in the Arabic script and then writing it again in the South Arabian script from the Islamic period. So they knew the script. Now, ancient Yemen, modern Yemen as well, is filled with inscriptions that you can see. You don't need to dig them up, but you could if you wanted. Ancient South Arabian inscriptions everywhere. Okay, you can see them. So the question is, this is a curiosity I had, and I asked the students this. Why is it that a kind of field of epigraphy didn't develop out of this curiosity? Why did these scholars not make the effort to document what they saw and try to read it? They had the alphabets and they had access to everything that modern scholars had access to be able to decipher its language. So why didn't they?
What was
it's very interesting. Yeah, sorry.
The Iqlil, am I saying that pronounced?
Yes, yeah.
What was that an attempt? And then also about that work, from everything that you described, that wasn't the only one. That's
not the only one. No. So you have some. So Hamdani does make some. He does actually. He's maybe unique in this way. Does give you some snippets of inscriptions and does some readings here and there and what have you. Right. So he makes that. But generally speaking, people didn't do that, and it didn't become a discipline. It didn't become a systematic effort to kind of read these texts and understand them. Rather, the texts were used sort of as props to perform. So lots of times you get quotations in Arabic sources of Himyarite inscriptions. And what they do is they just read Arabic poetry in them. Like, there's there's no Himyarite inscription, no ancient South Arabian inscription is Arabic poetry. But they would read Arabic poetry in them, or prophecies. They would read into them prophecies about the coming of the Prophet Muhammad and this kind of stuff. So they were using them as props for history, right? And so that's curious to me. Why didn't they actually try to decipher these texts, to study them in a systematic way, right? And I don't think it's definitely not because of that they couldn't have accomplished that. They would have easily accomplished it, right? They had, when these texts were deciphered and understood in the 19th century, these scholars had the same resources, even more abilities to do so, since they still had remnants of the Himyaritic language among them, okay? So the reason why now we can only hypothesize, but I think it has to do with what the Jahiliyyah was for them. And the Jahiliyyah was a stage, theater, tell stories. There wasn't a systematic attempt to know what happened in a positive sense, right? What actually happened, but rather to tell stories about the past that sort of explain the present. Right, or legitimize certain things, or give glory to people in the present. So the past is functioning in that way. So there was no real effort to know about the past in the way Muslim scientists were doing, in the natural sciences. Very systematic efforts to understand nature and other things. In the realm of history, at least the Jahiliyyah, distant past, the approach was very different. Right. So in that sense, are they outsiders? Well, they are. Descendants of Himyarites, for example, so they're insiders in that sense, but they're not using primary sources, right? And they're not, and if they're using any sources at all, it's folkloric, and they are, and they're not trying to investigate the material in an organized and scientific way, right? They're just, how do you say it? Well, it's story time, and I think that's good. I don't say that in a pejorative way at all, right? I think stories are perhaps one of the most important things we do as a species. Definitely. But they were telling stories. Yeah.
And why did you choose to focus in your work on the Safaitic inscriptions in particular? How broadly applicable are those inscriptions in your view?
So Safaitic is the largest corpus of ancient North Arabian. So it's a corpus that allows us the opportunity to learn the most we can. How broadly applicable? I think they're only applicable to the Safaitic inscriptions. You know, we can see comparisons with other stuff that's happening in Thamud in North Arabia. And we can see that they had certain commonalities in religion and things of this sort, at least in the divine world and what have you. Yeah, it's can we say that can we say that in 100 AD, the inhabitants of Mecca and Taif or whatever were doing the same thing the Safaitic guys were doing? I think they probably had very different gods, I would imagine. I can't see them sharing the same gods, but I would bet money on the fact that they were both sacrificing, putting up sacred stones, making pilgrimages, pouring libations. Everyone in the Near East was doing that, right? Everyone in the Near East. So that's not too far. But the actual deities themselves, I think that it's very unlikely that the Safaitic deities you would find them around all of Arabia. And when you look at Kitab al-Asnam, you know, most of the deities that are mentioned in the Safaitic inscriptions don't appear there. Right? They don't know about them. You have some like you know, about half the deities in that book come from the ones that are, well, less than half, but you know, a good number come from the deities mentioned in the Quran. Right? The ones in Surah Al-Najm, Lat al-Uzza and Manoh, and then you have the ones in Surah Nuh, right? With the Wad, Yaghuth, Ya'uq, Suwa, and Nasr. All right, those 5. These were the antediluvian deities that are mentioned in the Quran. And for me, it's significant that in the Quran they're antediluvian. That means they're gone. They were destroyed with the flood. But they appear in Ibn al-Kalbi. And so what you have to do is come up with a narrative as to how did these ancient gods that were destroyed in the flood, how did the Arabs end up worshiping them again, right? And so the story is that they dug them up. They were buried, but then they excavated them, they dug them up, and they somehow knew what their names were. You know, it's well, it doesn't really matter. You're not supposed to think about stories that way. It's a story, right? It's a story. It's just a story. But they dug them up, and that's how they came back into the world, right? So that's very interesting. These deities, all of them except for Ya'uq is attested epigraphically. All right. So Suwa, Nasr, Wad, and Yaghuth, all these deities are attested epigraphically, but Ya'uq is not. And these deities that are attested epigraphically come from South and Central Arabia. Okay, which is very interesting. And they are ancient. They're not antediluvian, but they're, you know, a good 500-600 years before the Quran, right? So it seems to me that what the Quran is demonstrating is that people have a distant cultural memory of these names. They know that they're ancient gods from a lost era, right? Completely in the past. The Quran is presenting them as antediluvian gods because, you know, these are names that people knew were worshipped way back in the day. And, you know, in these contexts, the difference between 500 years ago and 5,000 years ago is sort of irrelevant. It was just a long time ago. Yeah.
And I'm sure much hasn't changed in that period anyway. I mean, we have the most productive period, I would say, probably in the last 200 years, if you really think about it.
Yeah.
In terms of, I mean, you do a very close sort of textual study of the inscriptions in your work, and you examine like the formulaic structures of the prayer, etc. What can those structures sort of tell us about the beliefs of those that use
them? They conceal more than they tell, because what happens is you have a culture where you have formulae that are used to invoke deities in certain circumstances. So you want to go on a raid, you need to call upon the deities to keep you safe. You want to pasture your animals, you want to call on the deities to keep you safe. You want to go on a migration, you need to be safe, right? And they get more detailed, but they're very much connected to the narratives, and they're very formulaic in that way. And because they're so formulaic, we don't have access to their literature. Right? They're not writing their literature. Their literature is clearly oral. They certainly had stories about the gods and legends and myths and all of this stuff, but they weren't writing it down because their writing tradition was so formulaic. So it conceals more. And if you look at early Islamic inscriptions too, you get the same idea. I mean, the vast majority of early Islamic inscriptions attest a limited number of pious formulae. Allahumma aghfir li fulan, right? May God have mercy on so and so, right? And taraham Allah ala, you know, this kind of stuff, right? So formulaic language. So that continues. Actually, most graffiti in the world is formulaic. But every once in a while, our writers depart from the formulae. Okay, they leave it, and they let us know a bit about their spiritual world. Okay, and when those few examples, they become very difficult to decipher because we're used to reading the formulae, and but they are so valuable. So, for example, one of my favorite inscriptions. I published this text in 2017, maybe, or 18. I don't know, one of those years. But it's a very nice text. It is a man. They're all men. Most of them are men. There's a tiny percentage of text produced by women. He records stopping and grieving for the dead. Okay, so this is going to foreshadow things that we see in pre-Islamic Arabic poetry. Connections are very interesting. And then he calls upon Allah. Halat. Ammiri sadiqik. Give long life to your righteous worshiper. Wagannini, and protect him. Shield him. Wamin maut laysa fathai. But from death there can be no deliverance. Right? So this is a very interesting, it's a beautiful prayer, right? This idea that you should that you call upon the deity is going to save you, protect you, and whatever, but ultimately every soul tastes death, right? And there's no escaping it. The gods cannot help you for that, right? So another inscription, absolutely beautiful. This man sacrifices a camel, all right, to a god called Shaykh Qawm, which means literally like leader of the army or leader of the people. It's a epithet, okay? Shaykh Qawm, leader of the people. Beautiful text. Then he goes and gives us a prayer to this deity. Beautiful prayer. Innaka bughyu wa qufyatu. You, indeed, you are the one I seek, or the one, it's in third person, the one he seeks, and his path. Wa bi khafratka, or bi khafratak, I don't know how to vocalize it properly. Maybe khafratka, why not? Wa bi khafratka fultan min maut. And through your guidance comes deliverance from death. All right. Beautiful prayer. Absolutely gorgeous prayer. Here, of course, they seem to be contradictory. One guy is saying we can't escape death. The other guy is saying through your guidance comes deliverance from death. I would say the second one is that kind of momentary deliverance. Like, you know, when you go into battle, the god delivers you from death there. The arrow misses you. The sword, you know, misses you. And so the god has saved you. But ultimately, death gets you. Death is inescapable. And that force, so the Safaitic guy, their worldview, I think this is what makes it very different from the Quranic pagans. Let's remember the Quranic pagans. The Quran tells the Prophet to ask the pagans, ask them, who created the heavens and the earth? And the Quranic pagans will say, Allah, right? They agree with them. We agree, Allah, but we believe these other guys, they can intercede, huh? They can act as intercessors, right? And so there's the whole drama of how much how much power these other beings can have and whether they even exist later on. So that's a different story. But the Quranic pagans do have this idea of a supreme God called Allah, who is created and controls everything. Now, in the Safaitic world, these ancient Arabian nomads, they've got a little bit of a different view of the world. So you have your gods. We don't know who the creator God is from their inscriptions. We don't know who's at the top either. right? Surely there's some kind of hierarchy, but we don't know who's at the top. But we know that they have their specialized roles. So you have Rotho, who literally means satisfaction. That's what his name means. He has his daughter Allat, who's fertility. There's Baal Samin, who controls the weather. He's the storm god, rains and all this business. Shai Haqqom, which seems to be a military god, right? The leader of the military. So you have these roles. Okay, great. You pray to these gods, you sacrifice them for boons, to them for boons and rescue and escape. That's only half of the divine world. There's another half of the divine world, and that is called in the Safaitic inscriptions Manai, which corresponds with later Arabic, again, pre-Islamic poetry and everything, Manaya, which is fate time, all right? Now
Or,
this...
I was going to say how Tarif Khalidi in his work on, I actually have it right here, 1 second, just so I don't butcher it.
Yeah.
The Arabic historical thought in the classical period by Tarif Khalidi, I remember he translated Manaya as the doom.
Manaya, yeah. As
doom,
what?
The
doom, yeah, doom. I mean, I would, if I were to give it a translation, I would translate as a Terminator. All right, the Terminator. Why? Why would I translate it as a Terminator? In my description of Manai and Safaitic, I was actually inspired by that. So Manai, all right, is responsible for death, right? Dooms everyone. But Manai is deaf. You can't pray to her or him or whatever it is. You can't pray to it. You can't sacrifice to it. Doesn't hear, doesn't listen, doesn't care. Nobody's praying to Manai for, please have mercy on me. Please, we kill a camel for you. Please leave me alone now. No prayers to Manai. Okay? It stalks you. Manai stalks you. It's constantly stalking you through your life. All right? It's a hunter. All right? You see what I mean by Terminator.
Terminator, yeah.
And you're running, I mean, your entire life, and you get this sense in the pre-Islamic Arabic poems as well, right? Manai is a hunter, right? In the Mu'allaqa of Labid, right? You have Inna al-manaya la tatishu sihamuha. Indeed, the fates, their arrows never miss their mark, right? So they're hunting you. You get the image of the weapons, whatever. So what you do is you pray to the gods. You pray to the gods to give you escape, momentary escape. Okay, they can save you for a bit. All right, you can convince them to save you by killing animals for them. They like that. All right, or you can do a libation, or you can go to their temple, make a pilgrimage there. Or there are many things you could do to gain their favor. But ultimately, you don't hold the attention of the gods forever.
Right.
And ultimately, they abandon you. And the Safaitic inscriptions tell us what happens when they abandon you. You become a yatim. You become an orphan. All right, very interesting. Fine. So you're abandoned by the gods. And then at that moment, that's the moment when fate strikes you down. Right? You become Rahim Manai. You become struck down by fate. So the world is this constant cycle between this sort of, I wouldn't call it really a battle, but the individual as a human in the center, and you're basically between the favor of the gods and being struck down by this terminating force, the fate.
Part of limbo,
right?
basically.
Yeah, and ultimately, as a human being, fate always wins, right? Ultimately, in the long run, fate comes out on top. The gods never follow through forever. The fates come out on top, and you die. Yeah.
So I guess that leads me to my next question. In the Safaitic inscriptions, do we have any theories of the afterlife? Do they conceptualize any about what happens after the dooms or the Terminator strikes you?
No information about it. No. Wow. No information about that. There is there's no, well, okay. There is some indirect. So I make this argument a little bit in the book. All the curses, all right, all the curses that the Safaitic authors have, they protect their texts. They're very interested in keeping their texts safe, okay? And they have a ton of curses, all kinds of wonderful, terrible things, right? May you get leprosy, scabies, where you develop a limp, have a stomach ache, become mute, blind, deaf, dumb, your camel die. All kinds of terrible things can happen to you if you damage the text. So anyone who damages this text, these terrible things are going to happen to you. They're curses, all right? Now, all the curses that you find in these inscriptions concern al-haya dunya, the present world. There is not a single curse that concerns the afterlife. They never say anything like, may whoever destroys this inscription go to hell, right? Doesn't exist, which leads me to, and they're very detailed, so it leads me to believe or to hypothesize that what the gods, whatever was happening after you died, it was beyond the realm of the gods. The gods, you could pray to them to curse people in the world that we live in today. But what's beyond that, that's beyond the power of the gods. They don't affect what happens to you after you die. Now, do they go to some kind of Sheol? Do they, who knows what happens to you after you die? I mean, yes, maybe there's an afterlife for sure, but, well, okay, for sure. Likely to be an afterlife, right? Maybe, but we don't know what's happening there. They don't mention it. So it seems to be sort of like, like the afterlives of ancient Mesopotamia or ancient Egypt. You just kind of, everyone goes to the same place and you just hang out there. Yeah, it's no judgment, none of this business. And I would say, while we don't have any evidence for it, I would say with probably as much certainty as you can that they probably didn't believe in a resurrection. Yeah, no resurrections. Yeah,
we tell from the Quran. Well, I think that we can exactly tell from the Quran that the people who wrote the Safaitic inscriptions didn't, but I would conclude so just from.
Well, the Quran says the pagans, what do the pagans say? They say, what is there but this worldly life? We die, we live, or we sleep, and we wake up, and nothing dooms us but fate. Fantastic, huh? Fantastic. That's the Safaitic spirit, right? Right there. Yeah.
This sort of doom-laden spirit that sort of infuses all of these inscriptions with this sort of dense pessimism and fatalism. What does that say about the environment and society of pre-Islamic Arabia? Is that a reflection of anything to do with that?
I mean, it could be. There is a nice mythological text where you can see the connection between their mythological world and the world that they're living in. So this is a text that I published in 2015. I didn't put it in the book because it's not quite Safaitic. It's something very strange, something very old and very strange. But it's in the same area, it's the same world. Okay, we can see echoes of it in Safaitic, and the Safaitic inscriptions proper. So what does this text say? It begins like this. So Mot, this is a deity, death, has held a feast. The scorner eats. The scorner eats. You see, it's rhyming. And established is the alternation of his nights and days. خلاف لياليه وأيوامه وها بعل يبيت وله بات ما نام. And O Baal sleeps. He indeed sleeps, but he is not dead. Okay, so this, I mean, it's a beautiful poem. It is a echo of the ancient Canaanite Baal cycle. Okay, but in the Safaitic context, what are they talking about? You have two deities. You have Baal and you have Mot. Now, Baal, do you remember who Baal is? He's the storm god. He's the god responsible for the rains. He brings the rains, and with it, he brings the world back to life. Mot is the death of the world, right? The poem here is a seasonal myth that describes the alternation between the dry season, where Mot reigns, the world dies, and his rule is established by the alternation of his nights and days, okay? And then Baal comes, and this happens when he defeats Baal. So there's a cosmic battle between these two forces. The god Mot defeats Baal. We think Baal is dead, but he's not. He's sleeping. He goes into hiding. And the poem is hopeful. He sleeps indeed, but he's not dead. Why is that? Because, well, when the summer's over, what happens? The rains return. The world comes back to life. And that is, in mythological terms, the return of the god Baal. He comes back to life. He's not really dead. He comes back to life and he vanquishes Maut. He strikes him down. And the world is brought back to life again. So it's a harsh world, but it can be you explain it with stories, right? You want to explain why is the world dead half the year, and then comes back to life. You have this nice way of doing it by well, these stories are quite nice, and you have in the Safaitic inscriptions what seem to be very enigmatic expressions that. But when you understand them in the context of this poem, they make a lot of sense. So you have an inscription by a guy where he says, "Wagama min duni ba'al." It's during a dry season, and he says, or during a drought, we don't know, but he says he grieves in the absence of Baal. And or Baal Samin, sorry, he calls it fully Baal Samin, sorry. And then the Wagama here is a verb of grieving that, if we look at it throughout the Safaitic corpus, is primarily used to grieve the dead. So he's grieving for the this is the death of the god of rain. He's dead, and so everything is dead. And then he's going to come back. So this is the dying and rising god theme, right? Which is very cool. Yeah, and you can even hear. I think you have echoes of this story even in the monotheistic traditions. So Baal is what? He says, Yabit wa ma nam. He sleeps, but he's not dead. But the word for death is the metaphor used nama, right? Which is a verb, right? Now let's think many, 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 many centuries into the future. Think about Ayatul Kursi. God is described as how? La ta'khuduhu sinatun wa la nawm. God is what? He's described. It's usually translated as slumber or sleep or slumber. Do not overtake him, right? So he's being described completely opposite of Baal, where Baal does have to die and come back. The one God is eternal, does not die or never goes to sleep or anything of that sort. And the correspondences of the words nama and nom in both texts is significant, right? That's very interesting. So now, and I wouldn't. You can find similar expression in the Hebrew Bible and Psalms as well, right? Where God is described as not sleeping or slumbering or what have you, right? And both of these things, I would say, are perhaps, maybe, right? This is a world of speculation. This is not science, so. But maybe these are echoes of or interactions with that kind of Baal myth,
right? That's exactly what I was thinking as you were talking about it. Moving on to religious rites, what was the most common of them commemorated in the inscriptions, and what can this tell us about the religious worldview of the pre-Islamic? I mean, you kind of already went into of their worldview, but what your research was their most commemorated religious rite from your findings?
Yeah, so I counted them all up in the book, and it's the thing that they wrote the most about was sacrifice. Okay, the things that they wrote the most about sacrifice, and they always, whenever they mentioned what they were sacrificing camels. All right, so they would sacrifice these. Now we don't know what they did with the corpse. Did they eat it? Maybe they ate part of it. Did they burn part of it? We know the ancient custom of burning the animal so that the smoke goes up to the gods, and the gods smelled it and become very happy with the smell. Right? This is. This also, of course, continues into the Hebrew Bible. I mean, when Noah gets off his ship, he makes the sacrifice burnt offering, and God is very happy with the smelling the burnt offering, right? So it's a very so it's a common thing. So maybe they were doing that. There are a few attestations of what might be regarded as burnt offerings, right, or burning of the corpse, but they probably ate some of it too. But what's really interesting is our Safaitic guys, at least we have two very clear examples of this, where they sacrificed their camel. So you want to sacrifice it at a high place. And what did they call the high place? They called it a samad or samad, right? So that's the high place where you kill the camel, right? So we have one inscription where a guy talks about being at the samad wa dhabaha gamala alayh, and he sacrificed a camel upon it. All right. Then he calls out to the god, which I think is Yatha, salam min shanit. Okay, security from the enemy. All right, keep him safe, secure him from the enemy. Right. So what do you have there? You have the you go up to the summit, you have the sacrifice, and after the sacrifice, you have the prayer to the god to save you from the enemy. Right? Nice themes, huh? Very good. Yeah. Yeah. Sound familiar at all? Not okay. Yeah. All right. I won't say
it looks like to Roxana, but not to me so much.
Okay. What do you think, Roxana?
Well, in sort of the reflections of what we see in the Quran about in response to how the pre-Islamic or the nomads in that region were interpreting their sacrifice and how tries to correct that.
So the sacrifice is to have security from the enemy, right? Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar. Right, so we've given you the Kawthar. Very interesting line. Many very intelligent people have said a lot about it. فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرْ. So pray to your Lord and sacrifice. إِنَّ شَانِئَكَ هُوَ الْأَبْتَرُ. Indeed, your enemy will be cut off. So this is a Safaitic guy going up, doing his sacrifice to his Lord, doing the sacrifice, praying to his Lord, asking for, well, your enemy being cut off is quite equivalent to being safe from your enemy, right? But it's the same word in both. It's shanit. It's the shanit that you're after, right? So it shows, there is a, there are these kind of common themes and links, right? And even vocabulary from our ancient pre-Islamic material, and then to when we get to the background of the Quran. Yeah.
Definitely the way that you describe it makes it seem like the Quran is interacting with the Safaitic inscriptions, or definitely the mindset or the mentality of the people who are writing them.
Yes. So that's the very interesting thing about the Quranic text, is because it's interacting with, what we would call monotheists, right? Monotheistic traditions, biblically inspired traditions, or what have you. Christians, Jews, the enigmatic Sabians, and other groups. But it's also interacting with the mushrikeen. And the mushrikeen in some ways are very similar to the monotheists, right? They have their one God, and they have a lot in common with other monotheist mushrikeen, but in other ways, the mushrikeen have a lot in common with our Safaitic guys.
Right.
Isn't that interesting, right? So their idea of fate and no afterlife or resurrection, and so in many other ways they share things in common with our Safaitic guys, with our real Arabian pagans, right? So it complicates in a nice way, I think, a very interesting way, an exciting way. It complicates our understanding of who these mushrikeen are. Yeah.
All right, you already mentioned the goddess a lot, but what are the other most frequently invoked deities in the inscriptions, and what specific cosmic and interventional roles did they play?
Both. Well, yeah, I gave a lot of examples, I think, that answer that question. But I would just say, Baal Shamin, the rain god, is very clearly in charge of the rains. This is the guy who does the rains. When it's drought, they blame him for holding back the rains. Right? He actually holds them back, right? Or he's dead, or whatever. Depends on what he's doing. He also has sacred water associated with him. Okay, so Baal Shamin is associated with sacred, or maybe puddles, pools, any water sources, sacred water sources. Now, if you were sick, how do you heal this person? You take him to a sacred water source. Okay, maybe baptize him, put him in the water, and then the god is supposed to heal you now that you visited his sacred water source. You have one inscription which I published, a very nice one, where a man says his companion is sick, and then he invokes Baal Shamin to heal him by means of his sacred pool. By means of his pool, doesn't say sacred, by means of his pool, but we assume it's sacred. Okay, and then he says fayaqul, so that he will say, ilah sadiq, that you are a righteous God. Very cool, right? So they can heal you. They have, different like sacred water and whatever that can heal you. And of course that idea of healing divine water is something that continues across time. I mean, you have it, Ibn al-Kalbi describes in his book healing sacred pools and so forth. And very, very cool stuff. Yeah.
And, we still have it all the way up to this day, to our day. I mean, I grew up in a Baptist background, and recognizing holy water is
yes,
very much essential. So it's
absolutely
stretch all the way back.
Holy water is still very much with us.
Go ahead, sorry.
Well, I was going to ask this question, unless Roxana wanted to ask,
No.
That leads us to the later Islamic tradition depicts Arabia on the eve of Islam, and especially the Hijaz, as largely populated by polytheistic idolaters, people who believe in a pantheon of gods and worship them as idols, etc. Does this depiction match the archaeological and epigraphic evidence that we find that we are finding for the pre-Islamic Hijaz?
Oh man, that is that's ground zero. That's there's a huge debate, academic debate on this subject, right? Where you have some, for example, like Michael Lecker would view the Quranic audience as being not very different from the Safaitic guys. Okay, same kind of people, basically. Real Arabian pagans. Hawting, on the other hand, thinks they were all monotheists already. Okay, they're all just monotheistic. And then you've got middle grounds, right? People who say, okay, well, they are monotheistically influenced, but they have some kind of pagan. Patricia Crona says, for example, the ancient goddesses Allat, Al-Uzza, and Mano have been reimagined as angels, right? They've become angels. It's very possible. There are many parallels you can point to that. And what's fascinating about these discussions for me is how the Quranic text can be used to argue for any of these positions, right? It can be used to support all of these positions, and people have done that by simply giving weight to certain ayahs over others, right? So you have Allat, Al-Uzza, and Mano. You can, that's just one mention, and maybe it's there's something else, and then you focus on the fact that they only worship Allah, right? That they recognize Allah, and they say that these are only our intercessors. Okay, so there's that. Then you can also move to the fact that they're, obviously sacrificing animals, and which is something that monotheists at this period weren't doing, and what do you call it? Clearly worshiping something, or venerating some things that are the names of which are etymologically ancient Arabian goddesses. Okay, so whatever Allat, Al-Uzza, and Manoh were in the Quran, historically speaking, these were goddesses. Okay, pagan goddesses. Maybe they have been reimagined. That's very complicated argument. They're pagan goddesses. So the Quranic text can be used to argue any of these positions, and then you go to sources like Ibn al-Kalbi, and you say, well, Ibn al-Kalbi shows that they're all just pagans. You can, of course, look at that stuff a little bit more closely, doubt its veracity. It's sort of a dead end. It's hard to make a definitive argument in supporting one position. All right, there's always other ways of viewing it, and it probably will always be that way. And I think it's very interesting. So there's a new approach, which is, let's look at what the epigraphy tells us people are doing, right? Let's look at what the epigraphy is going to tell us. These texts are going to be produced by people in the time period we want to know about, and not by people remembering that time period. And they're not polemical in the way that, let's say, the Quran is. The Quran is engaging with its enemies, right, with its opponents. So maybe it's not giving us a completely balanced presentation of their views and how they would present it themselves, right? Like we're not going to get that. All right, so right now we have more than 45 pre-Islamic Arabic script inscriptions dating from the late 5th century AD to probably the early 7th. Okay, about 45. All of these texts are and we use this word very carefully, I'm going to use this word to describe the contents of the texts and not to describe the religious acts of the people who inscribed them. All of these texts are, based on the contents of those inscriptions, monotheistic. What do we mean by that they are monotheistic? That they only invoke one God. There's no invocations to Allat al-Uzz al-Manoh. There's no invocations to Yaghuth, Ya'uq, Nas, Su'a, whatever you want. They're not there. They only invoke one God, which is in Najran, Dumat al-Jandal, Syria, Jordan, these areas. It is Al-Ilah, literally the God. And in the Hijaz, it is Allah, spelled in different ways. Now, Al-Ilah and Allah are surely the same thing, okay? And you can explain this linguistically with the deletion of the I vowel, okay? Between Al-Ilah, then you get Allah, and you delete the I vowel. I have no idea why Allah is pronounced with a dark L. No one can answer that question. We come up with a million hypotheses. We can't answer it, but it's very interesting. So then, only one God appears in the inscriptions. That's interesting, right? That's fascinating. And they are invoking that God using formulae, religious formulae, that continue into the Islamic period. So they tell people to obey that God. They seek that God's forgiveness. Yastaghfir Rabbah. We have one inscription where guys doing istighfar, he's seeking the forgiveness. I have an inscription from Taif where this one God's being called upon to ighfir, right? To forgive someone. Others, ulsi bibir, which is to urge one to obey or be pious towards the God. So, and all of these formulaic expressions continue into the Islamic period. So continuity in religious expression from pre-Islam to Islam, continuity in, of course, the veneration of one primary deity. But these inscriptions are too low resolution. We don't know their theology, right? What we do know is that they venerate one God, but that's exactly what the Quran tells us the mushrikun were doing, right? They had one primary God, right? So what the inscriptions suggest is that they're different than our Safaitic guys, and they're different from the very ancient pagans, because the very ancient pagans were invoking, like, some Safaitic inscriptions, you have 10 gods being called upon. They invoked everybody, right? By this period, they're only invoking one God, okay? So there is a religious change. Something has happened. We don't know about their theology, so we can say that these inscriptions are monotheistic and that they only invoke one God. But did the people invoking these gods, did they believe in lesser beings that could act as intercessors? And is that what the Quran is calling shirk? Well, that's what the Quran is calling shirk, right? So did they believe in those things? We have no idea. No clue, right? The inscriptions don't tell us. We can't know. But what we can know is that the vocabulary, the deity, the religious sentiments, everything expressed in these pre-Islamic texts continue into the Islamic period. That we don't see, there's one big innovation that happens. One big innovation. This is very important. The Basmallah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, is not attested in the pre-Islamic Arabic script inscriptions. They use Bismika Rabbana, Bismika Allahumma. And it's in the Islamic period inscriptions that we get the Basmallah. Okay? That's a difference. And that's a difference that's attested in Islamic period sources. When the Prophet was drawing up a treaty with the Quraysh, all right? He wanted to put Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and the Quraysh said, no, we don't do that. We do Bismika Allahumma. And that's what we get in the pre-Islamic inscriptions. Wow. So it's nice when these things kind of fit together. It's beautiful. Amazing. All right. So what I would say is that the epigraphic results support our need to complicate the image of the mushrikeen. They are not Safaitic pagans. All right. They are a little bit more complicated. They are, in some sense, monotheists, but certainly they were doing things like association and worshiping lesser beings that was causing them to be called mushrikun. Now, here's a fun question. I was doing this in class the other day, and I got a very nice response that illustrated my point well. Would the mushrikun have considered themselves monotheists? Would they have considered themselves? No, but we are only worshiping one God, and these other things that you're calling worship, these are just intercessors. We're just asking for their shafa'ah, for their help to reach this one God. But we believe there's only one powerful God that created everything. Okay, in their minds, they may have viewed themselves as monotheists in some sense, right? And I said to the class, I said, well, you know, in many parts of the Muslim world, you can visit the shrine of a saint. You can go visit the shrine of a saint, Muslim saint, and you can ask for shafa'ah. You can ask for intercession to intercede between you and God and to help you get good things and go to heaven. And the kid in the class said, that's shirk. And I said, precisely, right? I'm not taking a position on what it is. I'm saying that's the attitude, right? For them, the people doing this, they consider themselves pious Muslims. If you ask them, are you a mushrik? They would say, no way. We're only worshiping one God. We're not worshiping these saints. We're asking them for shafa, right? But from the point of view of let's say if you have a different theological orientation and you're a very strict monotheist, that's shirk. That's what they're mushrikun. So applying that idea to our pre-Islamic context, we could very much imagine a situation where the Prophet's message is one of, you know, a puritanical monotheistic message. No other beings are doing shafa'ah, none of this nonsense. You know, there's only one God and you communicate directly with him, unless he allows you to have shafa'ah, illa bi'idhnih, right? He can give you that permission. But anyway, and the other guys are saying, no, we still have these other magical beings and these angels, if you follow, these are all very difficult terms, angels or what have you, but let's say supernatural beings, but they were created by God. They're subordinate to him. They're not the, you know, there's still one God, and they just simply help us get to them. But we're really just worshiping one God. From the point of view, if you're following this new puritanical monotheistic religion, there's only one thing to call that, and it's shirk.
Yeah? And it's amazing how Islam didn't totally rid this idea of delegating some kind of spiritual or divine agency to lesser gods. You kind of see this practice go. We talked about it the other day within the context of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, but you see certain practices like this exist in Arabia all the way up into the 19th century, where they would use certain they would use intercessors in order to as agents for God, but they didn't see themselves as any less Muslim or such,
or monotheistic. Or monotheistic. So you can go back into the ancient period and you can and if these people produced inscriptions, if these people who are, let's say, visiting the shrines of saints and seeking intercessors, when they produce inscriptions, those inscriptions are going to use formula, and they're mostly likely going to read Allahumma ighfir li fulan. Right? They're going to only invoke Allah in the inscriptions. So if we looked at their inscriptions, they would just be monotheists, and we wouldn't see that complex theology behind it, right? So I think that's what we're getting from our pre-Islamic inscriptions. So it's wrong. I've seen some people do this. They say, oh, look, the pre-Islamic inscriptions are all monotheists. Therefore, there was no paganism. Well, paganism is a difficult term. What does it even mean? You know, you can call anyone a pagan. What does paganism mean? We don't know. The inscriptions are monotheists, but it doesn't mean that the people producing them aren't invoking other kinds of beings, which is what the Quran is telling us they're doing anyway. Yeah.
In terms of the sort of the religious population, the views of the religious population in that area, often scholars say that the Quran heavily implies that there was a strong Christian population living in the Hijaz at that time. Do we have any archaeological epigraphic evidence that supports the view of the existence of Christians in pre-Islamic Hijaz?
Well, I'm going to first put it this way. The Hijaz is not a bubble, right? There's this idea, unfortunately, that some people looking at, you know, pre-Islamic Arabia, they tend to think that if you're living in the Hijaz, you're living in some kind of cave forgotten by the world, and you have no connections to anybody. You're just in this bubble lost to time, you know, lost world. The Hijaz is look, okay, so let's go back to when I was talking about the 6th century Arabia. What do you have? Across Arabia, you have the use of one language, one script, one era. Okay, what does this mean? This means that all of these people are in contact and connection with each other, right? They're all in connection with they're all contact with each other. The Hijaz is using the same script and language, and everything is Najran, as Dumat al-Jandal, Assyria, and all these things. These people are in contact. They're participating in a common culture. All right. So the Hijaz is not in a bubble. All right, it has context elsewhere. So there is a huge Christian center that in Arabian terms is not very far away, and that's Najran, right? And there are lots of Christian inscriptions at Najran. And there, lots of attestations of historical. I mean, there's Christians at Najran. This is not debatable or disputable. You didn't even need the inscriptions to tell you there were Christians at Najran. Now, of course, there's going to be interactions between Hijazis and Najranis. Of course, right? There's going to be, these people don't just stay in their little villages. They travel, they move, they interact. You had, for example, markets, Souk Uqad, for example. You had Najranites come there. You had Qas bin Saad, was a bishop from Najran, come there, according to literary sources. Now, you don't have to believe these, and I don't necessarily believe we have the transcript of the speech he gave. But what they do tell us is that there is this kind of interactions and intermixing between different Arabian populations, right? And they know each other. If you follow the narrative, and you don't have to, and you can reject it, and that's fine, but it would suggest that you even had Christian bishops, right north of Mecca, north of Taif, sorry, preaching to the pagans, to the mushrikun, or whatever we're going to call them, right? You call them what you like, preaching to them and doing what you like, all right? So, so Arabia is connected. So I don't think, I think the question is wrong. Are there Christians in Mecca? Well, that's only immediately meaningful is if you say Meccans don't go anywhere, and they have no connections to anything. They're just stuck there, and that's not true, right? So are there Christians in Arabia? Yes, Arabia is filled with Christians. We have Christian inscriptions all over Arabia. Arabia is filled with Christians. There's plenty of opportunities for Hijazis to interact with Christian Arabians, even if there were not big populations of Arabian Christians in the Hijaz. That's a big if. We don't know. There's one inscription. There's one inscription so far from the Hijaz that could be Christian. It is it invokes the god Al-Ilah instead of Allah, and Al-Ilah is very much found in Christian inscriptions. And I've examined this inscription in person. I've seen it in person. I've looked at it. Right next to it, you have a cross, okay, that has been hammered out. So somebody came by and saw the cross and was like, get rid of it. This is not good. And that happens a lot. That's not rare. People do hammer out crosses later, but it seems like the text originally had a cross. Okay. So those two things would suggest that this was a Christian inscription. Maybe, that's one. But I think, the starting point of the question has to be problematized because, people move, there are interactions, and there may have been, you had Christians, at least you have Christian slaves in the Hijaz. So for example, when the Prophet went to preach at Taif, okay, he was rejected, they stoned him, they threw him out. Where did he seek refuge, right? He went to a vineyard, okay? And there was a Christian slave there working at the vineyard. That's what the tradition tells us. So the tradition does admit the presence of Christians in the area, right? They're there in some sense. Or the question we have to ask is, are the elites Christian too? Well, there's no evidence we have to suggest that the elites of Mecca or whatever were Christian, right? We don't have it. Yeah.
Okay, and this is a really interesting question, and it's one that I haven't found much maybe there's scholarship out there, and I'm just not aware of it.
Yeah.
I thought maybe it might be an original one. Do you have any insights into the origins of the Kaaba? Can it be related to other pre-Islamic institutions and customs?
Origins of the Kaaba. There's two ways to approach that. You mean like the people have built the Kaaba over time? Yeah, it's been destroyed and rebuilt many times and stuff. I think the question you're getting at is, and correct me if I'm wrong, do we have any evidence for Mecca and the Kaaba being a sacred pilgrimage site, goal of pilgrimage in the pre-Islamic period, right?
That, as well as do we know even how it as a settlement, aside from the literary Islamic era sources, came about? Was it a well? Was it a stopping point? Just this kind of history, I find extremely.
Yeah, no, it's not a at least as we understand most trade routes, it's not a hub of trade. It's not on the hub of a trade route, but that's okay. I mean, that's a lot of sacred sites seem to be out a little bit in the middle of nowhere. That's fine. You get this idea that it's completely barren and there's nothing to do there. No, I mean, I've visited the area many times. Agriculture is very possible in Mecca. You have farms, you have agriculture. It's a myth that you can't grow in Mecca. You can, and people do. You go there, just go on the internet and write farms Mecca, and you will see people are growing things. And it's not necessarily, it's not from what do you call it? All artificial water they're bringing in the 20th century. I mean, a lot of it is what they call grown by rainwater, right? So you can have things that are grown by rainwater, but you also have irrigation. You have a water source at Mecca, of course. So people people must have been settled there and doing things, right? There's an opportunity to grow stuff. Something that suggests the area was settled in pre-Islamic times may not be, of course, Islamic period sources remember it as sort of the center of the world. Maybe it wasn't that. I mean, we have no pre-Islamic sources referencing it, so it couldn't have been, such a big deal to people outside of the region. But you have Thamudic inscriptions at Mecca. Okay, so you have Thamudic inscriptions there, and these are, way pre-Islamic. All right, so at least centuries before the rise of Islam or the 6th century, you had people there. They were carving inscriptions, Thamudic inscriptions at least, right? They're not very interesting texts, most of them just names and what have you, but it shows you that there were people there in ancient times. Okay. You also have something very important, is that Mecca is not very far from Taif. Taif is an amazing place for agriculture. You can grow all kinds of amazing things there. I was surveying in the mountains of Taif, out south of Taif, beautiful mountains, surveying, looking for inscriptions. And, in there you have figs, pomegranate, all this things just growing. They grow grapes. It's beautiful. And it's not desert at all. This is prime agricultural territory, right? It is not desert at all. And it's very close to Mecca. It's just up the mountain, okay? And the connections between Mecca and Taif are very obvious, right? Qurashis had property in Taif, and they had their farms in Taif, okay? So it's funny because you get these kind of arguments that, look, the Quran is addressing agriculturalists, and that doesn't make sense for Mecca because it's the desert. It's like, hold on a minute, visit the place, huh? There's tons of agriculture going on, especially up in Taif, where the Meccans had their farms. So they're very easy to be an agriculturalist in this area. A friend of mine, actually, I was talking, you must come visit me and come to my family's farm. He's from the region. I said, what do you guys grow? And he lists me all these wonderful things that they grow, and it's not from artificial. They're not importing water to do it. All right, so it's so there's enough going on there that you could say there's reason to think people would be living there. All right, when did but what can we say about the Kaaba as such and as a sacred site or anything? Well, because it's not, and you asked from the point of view of archaeological and epigraphic sources. You didn't ask me about Islamic sources, so I'll say from the point of view of archaeological, epigraphic sources, and also pre-Islamic literary sources. Okay, it's just not there. It's not mentioned anywhere. It's just not there. So if you were to base your view on those sources and not later sources, and I always think somehow you need to make these things work together, okay? But let's say you base your view only on those sources. What do you end up saying? You say, okay, there's good reasons to believe there are people there. Like I said, there are Thamudic inscriptions there too. There are people there in ancient times. It's not completely empty. There's opportunity for agriculture and all this kind of business, so there's enough to live. It's possible that you had a shrine, a temple that was of local significance. Okay, so local, and people in Yemen never heard of it. People in northern Hijaz never heard. I mean, the people further apart just never have heard of it, right? It would have been something of local significance. Something that also suggests that it is old is the very name, Kaaba, okay? Kaaba is the name of a sacred architectural feature or structure in ancient South Arabia, where it's called both Ka'batum, Ka'bat, okay, with a Hamza, but also there's a variant with the Ain, Ka'bat, exact same word, okay? And it's attested in ancient South Arabia in pre-Islamic times, connected to shrines of divinities. So the word is very old. All right, so it suggests that, you know, okay, now we've got a connection with South Arabian Kaaba, the same exact word being used in these kinds of contexts. So there is something old about it. All right, even if it wasn't the very popular and known all around Arabia, it's, you know, it's not. Yeah, it probably was there for a little bit. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Those are all the questions that we have. I mean, I do have one more, but that's just pertaining to anything that you have, any research projects that you're involved in, anything that we can expect from you coming up, any works that you have set to be released.
Yeah, I'm behind in everything. I have publishers and everything complaining to me daily. Where is this? Where is that? I'm really behind in everything. I have so much to catch up on. I'm overcommitted. So one of the things that I'm finishing up now is the second and expanded edition of the Safaitic grammar. That's a big work. Should be fun. What else am I doing? I have field work planned. Hopefully I'll be in Jordan in spring, in the late spring, early summer. Okay. So there could be lots of random things. April next year, Journal of Near Eastern Studies. Me and my colleague and close friend, collaborator, Haytham Sidqi, are publishing an article called A Paleo-Arabic Inscription by a Companion of Muhammad. All right. So a Paleo-Arabic means pre-Islamic. So a pre-Islamic Arabic inscription by a companion of Muhammad. All right. It's a text we documented in Taif, and it is tremendously exciting. All right. So keep your eyes out for that. That'll be, we have to set, we revised, it's accepted for publication. Everything just takes forever for this stuff to actually appear. But anyway, next April, they said. Yeah.
Well, we'll definitely look out for that. And
yeah.
Very much thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule and your
it was a lot of fun
to speak with us. We've definitely wanted you on the channel for a long time. I mean, it's truly fascinating to Roxana and I, and we can't wait to see what else you have coming down the pipeline. If you have any final words, the stage is all yours.
Well, thank you both for having me, and yeah, let's stay in touch, huh?